Most of the people who live around Lake Atitlan in the western highlands of Guatemala are indigenous people. There are 350 million indigenous people worldwide, and they are to be found in a large number of countries and in all continents. The United Nations has declared 2004 to 2014 as a second decade for indigenous peoples. The aim is to further international cooperation in promoting the rights of indigenous people everywhere. In Guatemala, most of the indigenous people are of Mayan descent, and their lifestyle has changed little over the centuries. This is the reality the tourists come to see. But it's not the only reality for the indigenous peoples of Guatemala. It's not an accident that the local history is painted on a cemetery wall. In common with indigenous peoples all over the world, Guatemala's indigenous peoples have a history of injustice and persecution. The great achievements of Mayan civilization came to a brutal end with the invasion of the conquistadors. Under colonialism and later independence, Mayan people were effectively excluded as citizens. Recent decades brought 36 years of civil war that killed an estimated 200,000 people. Peace accords were signed in December 1996, and despite the celebration of 10 years of peace, the indigenous peoples of Guatemala are still marginalized and struggling to assert their human rights. The mass executions in remote indigenous villages will not be forgotten. Reconciliation is an important theme in the peace accords, and uncovering the truth about the past is considered essential if indigenous peoples are to join in a viable democracy for the future. This mass gravesite at Camalapa was exhumed over the last 2 years. 284 bodies were uncovered. The scientists clarify the identity and gather forensic evidence about the killings. They hope to secure convictions and challenge any impunity from crimes of genocide. While this is important from a human rights perspective, indigenous communities say that they just want to give their dead a dignified burial. The main problem we face is the legacy of the armed conflict. It has left an imprint. It left scars on the people. People are left to think that the only way to solve their problems is to fight. But I don't think that way. I believe that by helping each other, trying to understand each other, we can resolve our problems. Official figures suggest that at least 5 million people, about 40% of the population, are indigenous Guatemalans. 74% of them live in poverty, and they continue to suffer from racial, social, economic, and cultural discrimination. Like most indigenous people worldwide, their human rights are often not respected. Guatemala appears to be a modern, developing country. 10 years of peace has brought stability and prosperity, for some. On the other side of town, you'll find a predictable pattern of social disadvantage. Indigenous people are overrepresented in statistics for illiteracy, unemployment, life expectancy. A quarter of indigenous children don't go to school and work to support their families. Some indigenous children are not even registered at birth, contributing further to their marginalization and vulnerability. Go into a prison anywhere in the world and you'll find the marginalized people of that society. In the women's penitentiary in Guatemala City, human rights workers come to visit prisoners from indigenous communities. They report on the situation and liaise with the prison authorities on behalf of the women. The major problem for indigenous people and the judicial system is the matter of communication. These women have no Spanish. At the time of their arrest, trial and imprisonment, they could not understand what was going on. Some claim they never understood the charges put against them and protest their innocence. One way of highlighting political and civil rights issues is through the network of over 200 local community radio stations in Guatemala. Ixchel Stereo broadcasts in indigenous languages and is run on a voluntary basis. Discussion and information programs form a large part of the station's output, along with language classes and programs celebrating traditional culture. It claims an audience of 25,000 people. The radio station is one of dozens of projects funded by the European Union. This school project is a type of after-work education program. It's designed for children who either are working or may be sent out to work. Other funding is directed at economic development programs, such as this organic coffee cooperative. the European Union is the largest contributor to development aid in Guatemala.
Our presence here in Guatemala concerns lots of other issues, but indigenous peoples are part of the population that is not included in the development of this country. This country lately has been developing a little bit, but this part of the population is being somehow forgotten, and we would like to help. You cannot fight against poverty when a big part of your population is out of this development, so you have to include them.
The Choyaj family live on a small holding and, like their neighbours, farm maize and beans. They also have chickens. There are 5 children in the family, and today the eldest is working in the fields. Everyone helps with the chores. But this year, William is going to secondary school. No previous generation has had this opportunity. Funding from the European Union has enabled the Katoki Farmers Cooperative to develop an educational programme for 12 to 15-year-olds. Importantly for this community, it doesn't cost money to come to school here. There's a strong vocational dimension to the education, along with academic work. Bilingual education is practiced, and the pupils also learn English. They study computer science. They get a rounded education that includes health and civic studies. Locals say they used to see children around here carrying firewood on their backs. Now they carry school bags. The students who come to this school come from the immediate and the surrounding areas. They come from very poor families. Even though they can contribute to the family income at home, they come here to the school because they value an education. And here they get a very good education and very good food. The facilities here are a very high standard, and the environment is very suitable for learning. Increasingly, indigenous groups are working together to campaign for a better deal internationally. EU support is also helping in giving a voice to indigenous representatives in international fora, to support their coordination across continents, to share information. So far, there has been some progress with the United Nations in promoting a specific declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. We all have the same problems as indigenous peoples. We share the same issues. And we, the indigenous women, the indigenous people of Mexico and Central America, and all indigenous people everywhere, we are already working together to accomplish the same goals. Indigenous peoples are looking for something most people take for granted. They want the right to freely pursue their political, economic, social and cultural development.